Ever wondered if everything wrong with you could be explained by a weird little bump on your skull? Like, ah yes, this ridge right here, clearly the reason I trust gas station sushi. Well, there was once a time when people did just that, and they bet their lives on it. Careers, reputations, even executions, all decided by someone aggressively feeling around your head like they're checking a melon at Walmart. And somehow, this passed as science, for a lot longer than people realize. Hi, I'm Candi. I collect bones, bullets, and bad decisions from history, and welcome to my Cabinet of Curiosities. People have told me on more than one occasion that I need to have my head examined. So I brought Fred along as a point of reference. Fred is a phrenology bust, and he is going to help me unlock the secret of why I am the way that I am. Or at least, people back in the day thought that he would. Today, we're talking a little bit about phrenology and how its influence swept the nation, like the Victorian version of Buzzfeed astrology. Phrenology was first theorized in the 1790s and officially made its debut in the world of science in 1810 by German-born physician Franz Joseph Gall, who totally had a normal-looking noggin. At a time in history where most people believed that the soul was the seat of the mind, Gall determined that it was actually the brain. Not only that, but there were several areas of the brain, or organs, that determined a person's various traits, like their personality type or mental faculty. There were so many areas you can point to and measure to figure out exactly what's right or wrong with someone. Destructiveness, secretiveness, acquisitiveness, desire for liquids. Basically the personality traits of a dude who owns 3 katanas. In Gall's time, it was super difficult to see the brain to determine what kind of person you were. Well, I mean, they could, but they'd have to be post-living, and what's the point of finding out that someone has a propensity towards benevolence if they're dead now? It also really limits your customer satisfaction surveys. So how else could they examine the brain without cracking open the casing? By doing a literal head exam. Getting a head exam by a phrenologist was kind of like taking a Myers-Briggs test combined with a palm reading, using your cranium as a sort of crystal ball. They thought that the brain was something like a muscle, and different parts of the brain were naturally over or underdeveloped, creating noticeable lumps, bumps, dips, and affecting the overall shape of the skull. Gall believed that a person's morality and intelligence were shaped at birth, and that the skull could let the rest of us know exactly what kind of degenerate or intellectual you were. During a skull reading, the phrenologist would feel your skull with hands and sometimes calipers, make notes on bumps and indentations, and reference their own little Fred bust to figure out what made you tick.
And in the end, one might even come to this.
Gall practiced on a lot of pickpockets.
Pickpockets!
And apparently enough of them had a bump just above their ears, and he figured that meant that they were high in acquisitiveness. Or in other words, had a tendency to acquire, save, and hoard. That doesn't count. I'm sure the fact that they were exclusively arresting pickpockets had absolutely no effect on his findings. This science really took off in England and then in America in the 1800s. Thanks to Gall's protege, Johann Kaspar Spurzheim, the US was introduced to phrenology, where it gobbled it up. Spurzheim was basically the 19th century version of a podcast bro. Except instead of selling questionable supplements and crypto, he was selling the idea that your dome dimples meant that you sucked at algebra. Its uses were in the realm of self-help and self-improvement, especially in America. We love our self-help gurus. Spurzheim spread the good word of phrenology in 1832 during a lecture tour that lasted for only 6 months. He probably would have gone longer, but he died. Typhoid fever, basically the Victorian version of getting nerfed by bad plumbing. But he made a huge impression on a lot of people. A lot of really smart people. The Harvard president of the time handled his funeral arrangements. They preserved his heart, brain, and skull and put them on public display. They even erected a grand monument for him in the style of a Roman altar tomb of Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus. Barbatus? Barbatus.
Lucius Cornelius Scipio Barbatus.
Sorry. Ralph Waldo Emerson even said that Spurzheim was one of the world's greatest minds. Even the American Journal of Medical Sciences wrote, "The prophet is gone, but his mantle is upon us." Take it easy, dude.
Heresy!
Other notable people who bought into the cranium reading craze were Walt Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, Queen Victoria, and the founder of the American Red Cross, Clara Barton. Not to mention the tons of regular plebs like you and me who would spend what little of their extra cash they had on hand to get regular readings and buy all the merch. Don't act like you wouldn't fall for it too. I know half of you probably paid someone to find out what your attachment style is, whatever that means. A phrenologist would read a person's head, give them a description of their strengths and weaknesses, and advise them on how they could improve certain traits or try to tamp down less desirable ones. This kind of thing has always been popular with people like us. We're always desperately trying to figure out who we really are, what we're actually like, why we are the way that we are, and how we can be better versions of our true selves. And phrenology offered the people of the time every answer they needed. But phrenology's uses eventually evolved into something more serious than just cutesy little personality readings. In some cases, head exams could determine life or death. The year was 1928 in Georgia, and the fate of 3 accused killers were hanging in the balance. The accused were James Hugh Moss, Clifford Thompson, and Eula Annie Mae Thompson. The crime? The murder of shopkeeper Coleman Osborne. The trio were moonshine bootleggers in the height of Prohibition. One evening in 1927, they rolled up on the shopkeeper's general store, car loaded with moonshine whiskey and totally out of gas. The 2 men left the vehicle, Eula and the booze, and walked to the now closed store to fill up their tank. They were able to rouse Osborne from his sleep, after which they got into some sort of altercation with him, and then shot him dead. When they were eventually caught, all 3 bootleggers were given the death penalty. Sometime during their incarceration, a phrenologist was summoned to the prison and gave them all a head exam. Were they irredeemable murderers, or could they be rehabilitated? Their guilt and judgment of this case had already been made, but the governor of Georgia may have considered interfering in the case. According to one newspaper, the outcome will depend upon the faith in phrenology of Governor Hardman. Another news report said, Governor Hardman announced recently that the phrenology of Clifford Thompson and Jim Hugh Moss played a part in his decision to not interfere in their cases. Hardman said, believing that the verdict is just and that the parties are guilty, and reading as best I can their physiognomy and phrenology, I feel that the court rendered a righteous verdict. The 2 were scheduled for execution via electrocution and fried like Sunday chicken for the murder of Coleman Osborne. But what about Mrs. Thompson? Her life was ultimately spared. Governor Hardman said the decision to commute her sentence was based on the bumps on her head and deciding that she could be redeemed. It was probably also for more selfish reasons. Imagine being the governor that sent the first woman in Georgia to the electric chair. Not a good look. Eula's sentence was commuted to life in prison, and then 8 years later, Governor Talmadge pardoned her. In 1936, she was a free woman with a presumably good head on her shoulders, until she murdered her brother. Yeah, apparently the bumps on her head were a lie, or the interpretation of the bumps on her head were a lie. I mean, really, all they had to do to figure out if she was a person who could be reformed was to look up her past. Before she became a bootlegger and then a murderer, Eula was already pretty infamous.
What does that mean, infamous?
Oh, Dusty. Infamous is when you're more than famous.
Before she turned 23, she'd already built a resume that read less like a biography and more like a police blotter. She was kicked out of church at 15, accused of bigamy, faced charges for running a house of prostitution, and already served time in Tennessee for bootlegging. At that point, you'd think simple pattern recognition would be enough to predict future behavior. You know, eyes, ears, basic human observation. Nope, they just went with aggressive head pets. And you'd also think that barely escaping execution for murdering a man might inspire a little self-reflection. A real second chance at life. Not old Eula.
I don't go to school and I kill people. Whatever, I do what I want.
A little while after her pardon and release from prison, she and 2 other men named Virgil Scott and Kermit Pritchett decided to pay her father a visit. Her brother Walker lived nearby and came out to see who pulled into the driveway. When he realized who it was, he was furious. Apparently, he had already told Pritchett to never bring Eula or Scott back to the house again. Her family, unsurprisingly, did not share the phrenologist's opinion that Eula's skull bumps meant that she was redeemable. That's when Eula and Walker got into a heated argument, and Walker ended up slapping her. She left, but she wasn't happy. Later that night, she came back with Scott and Pritchett for round 2. This time, though, the family only saw Pritchett approach the house. Walker called out seeking who was there, and Pritchett told him to come outside. Walker walked over to talk, which quickly turned into a competition to determine who could yell the loudest.
Loud noises!
Then the yelling turned into a fight. While they were tussling, Scott and Eula popped up from behind a rose bush and attacked Walker. Walker's wife came out and tried to use a gun to protect her husband, and Eula held her back. Unfortunately, Mrs. Elrod wasn't able to stop them. Scott stabbed Walker, and he died almost instantly. All three, Scott, Pritchett, and Eula, were nabbed by police, again, and after their trial, found guilty of murder, again. Maybe her head was a little bumpy in all the wrong places. Or, hear me out, maybe phrenology is fake.
Fugazi, fugazi, it's a wazi, it's a woozy, it's a fairy dust. It doesn't exist. It's never landed. It is no matter. It's not on the elemental chart. It's not real. Right? Right.
Today, we know that phrenology is pseudoscience. To be fair, the brain does have specialized regions. Different areas handle different things like language, motor function, emotion, and personality. It just isn't organized the way that Gall or Spurzheim thought. And you definitely can't tell what areas of the brain are stronger or weaker based on a glorified scalp massage. It's all just way more complicated than that. But phrenology didn't begin as deliberate fraud. It started as a genuine attempt to understand the human mind, where consciousness comes from, why people behave the way they do, and whether someone could truly be rehabilitated, which are legitimate questions. It started on the right track. It just took a hard left turn towards the absurd. Fred sat on desks in courts, in prisons, quietly nodding along while decisions were made about who lived, who died, and who deserved mercy. And the dangerous part isn't just that this was bad science, it's that it looked like good science. It tricked a lot of very intelligent and influential people who even came with credentials. History and the realm of science are full of ideas that sounded smart, felt official, and ended up ruining lives anyway. And phrenology is just one reminder that authority, confidence, and jargon don't equal truth. So if someone in a lab coat, or a robe, or a uniform, tells you that they've unlocked the secret of who you are, maybe check their evidence first. Or at the very least, get a second opinion from someone who isn't made of plaster. Sorry, Fred. That's it from the cabinet. If you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more of my content, please press the like and subscribe buttons. And as always, stay weird and tell your dog I said hi.